2, 3.
Good evening, NABJ family. Thank you for joining the Broadcast Task Force. This webinar, Writing Compelling Stories Under Deadline. I'm so excited about this webinar. Joining us tonight is Boyd Huppert, who is a television reporter with KARE-TV in Minneapolis, and he does a Sunday program called Land of 10,000 Stories. Boyd has an impressive, seriously impressive resume. Listen to this. 16 National Edward R. Murrow Awards, more than 100 regional awards. This man knows his stuff, and we are honored to have him. Thank you, Boyd, for joining us.
Hi, Dorothy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. And I want to thank Jovan, too, Jovan Riley. She's running the polls today.
So
and,
let me explain real quick just how things are going to.
Okay.
We definitely want to take your questions. Boyd has a lot of video that he's going to show us, and he's going to kind of walk us through it so we can really get an idea of just the best way to write those compelling stories under deadline. Jovan, every now and then, she may have to start a tape for us. If we'll pause, we'll take your questions. So please get your questions ready. And again, Boyd, please continue.
All right. So we're going to show some video today, but I'm actually going to start with a story about a still photo, which we'll show you in just a minute. But let me give you the backstory of this still photo. I love this photo and what it represents. I think there's a lesson in this, not only for being a television news reporter, but also a life lesson in this. It's a picture that was taken by a man named Walter Yost Jr. In 1984. Walter Yost Jr. is a very esteemed photographer, spent years at Sports Illustrated magazine. And in 1984, he was assigned to cover spring training for Sports Illustrated. And in particular, he was sent out to take some photos of Yogi Berra, who was coming back to manage the New York Yankees. Yogi Berra is a Hall of Fame catcher. He had a previous stint as manager, was coming back in 1984 to take over the reins again of the team. And Walter Yost Jr. was very excited to be assigned to spring training to get for this photo spread, which he was told would include a cover photo. But that excitement quickly turned to frustration because he soon realized upon arriving at spring training that Yogi Berra really wanted nothing to do with him. And he was in a surly mood, and every time that Walter Yost Jr. Approached him to try and take a photo, Yogi Berra turned his back on him. And he ended up with a bunch of photos. Jovan, get the photo ready. But he ended up, when he got back to the offices, Sports Illustrated, with a bunch of photos that looked like this. Rolls and rolls of pictures of Yogi Berra's back. And he considered this a complete failure. But it took only a very wise editor and 2 words to turn that failure into a success. Jovan, let's look at the cover that actually ran in Sports Illustrated magazine from that photo that Walter Yost Jr. considered to be a failure. Adding those 2 words, Yogi's back, took that picture from failure to one of the most iconic covers in the history of Sports Illustrated magazine. And I love what this says. The line between success and failure is a thin one. And sometimes all it takes is a couple of well-chosen words and a good focus to take your failures and turn them into successes. And that's really what I want to concentrate on today in the hour that we have together. We'll be doing mostly day turns today, looking at some day turns and talking about strategies for turning those frustrating days into successful stories. So let's start with, we're going to start with some raw video. Jovan, you can get it ready. I'll do the setup on this one. You're going to meet a little boy named Moses in this raw video clip. Moses grew up in a slum in Nairobi, Kenya. It was his good fortune to meet a woman named Sandy, who was in Kenya with the organization Rotary, working on a clean water project. And you can go ahead and roll it, Jovan. The first person you're going to see here is Sandy. And now you're going to meet Moses. And you'll notice that Moses is holding our microphone in his hand. He grabbed that microphone off the top of the camera as soon as we came in the door and put the lavalier wireless microphone on him. He grabbed our shotgun mic off the top of the camera. He's pretending to be me. He saw me using that microphone, that shotgun microphone at the airport a week earlier, when he came to the Twin Cities, Sandy arranged for him to come here because under those sunglasses there's some really badly crossed eyes. He saw him in Nairobi, Kenya, saw those eyes, and wanted to help. So the Rotary Club brought Moses to Minnesota to have eye surgery. That's why he's wearing the glasses now. He's already had the surgery. And he grabbed that mic off the top of our camera when we came to do the follow-up story and is pretending to be me. Now we're just going to take a little look at this video and watch how this plays out. Jonathan Millot, who's the photographer here, by the way, thinks he's going to outsmart Moses by disconnecting that mic.
Put things back together. Oh, Moses is very playful, and he loves to tease, so he knows what he's doing. He's hiding something. It's like, and hide and seek is a big deal.
Boyd, can you tell us a little bit of what's
So
going on?
what are we doing here? When someone, a little boy like that, grabs a piece of our equipment or some other thing happens that we don't expect on our shoot, but particularly this instance where we set the camera down, this little boy grabs the microphone off the top of our camera. What's our inclination? I think for most of us, and for me too, it's to get it back, right? To grab the microphone back because we have work to do. We were under a really tight deadline on this day. This was running in our 4 o'clock newscast. So, none of us enjoy being assigned to the 4 o'clock newscast because we lose an hour or two rather be in the 5 or 6 and have that extra time. So we were standing on the deck at about 11 o'clock, having gone to the assignment meeting at 9:30. That deck at 11 o'clock. Then we had to go to a Rotary meeting where Moses was going to be introduced to the Rotarians. That ran from 12 to 1 o'clock, then a half-hour drive back to the station. So we're getting back to the station around 1:30 with the 4 o'clock story that we need to put together. I only tell you that because we were under deadline pressure, and yet this little boy grabbed the microphone and we let him have it. And the reason we did that is I think so often we go out on stories with the preconceived notion of what the story is going to be. Or maybe even worse than that, with no notion at all of what the story is going to be. And we come back with a lot of assignments. So we leave with an assignment. The assignment is a little boy from Nairobi, Kenya, has received eye surgery thanks to some Rotary members from Minnesota. So we leave with that assignment, but then we also come back with the assignment because we never find the story. So in allowing Moses to pick up our microphone and keep it for 15 or 20 minutes, as difficult as that is under deadline pressure, we were greatly rewarded because now I'm not deciding as the reporter what the story is, but Moses is telling me what the story is. Moses is giving us a gift that we accepted by just standing back and learning a little bit about Moses. So now that we know those things about Moses, let's take a look at the story that we put together to air in our 4 o'clock newscast that night.
But it's Mom in Nairobi, Kenya.
Are you interviewing me?
And even a TV station's microphone.
Downtown?
It's as good as Lego. As a toy.
Moses is very curious, and he loves to find every gadget in the house. Put your sunglasses away.
As fascinating as that microphone may be, Moses Kawara has something even better to show off.
Look into the camera so they can see how your eyes are nice and straight now.
Those beautiful straight eyes are brand new to Moses, who looked like this in his village in Kenya during a chance meeting with Danger Slater.
Welcome.
The district governor for Rotary International greeted Moses at NSP International Airport 1 week ago today.
These are the glasses that he got in his eye clinic.
In 1 week, local eye doctors and a dentist connected with Rotary have given Moses both a new look
Can you show them your new film?
and outlook.
He's seeing the world in a whole new way. boy who's never met in his entire lifetime.
You like those specs?
Tomorrow, this squirmy little 6-year-old will be back on a plane to Kenya.
Hello.
Hello.
My name's Melissa.
Today, Moses gave the members of the Edina Noon Road a chance to see
Ah,
the good deeds they had done.
Without a doubt, your life has changed. You'll go back to Africa as a different boy.
Eventually, he had to take back that microphone. The eyes of Moses against the king.
Boyd, that before you continue, and Javon and I did the same thing. As you guys can see, I put my earbuds in because the audio was low. I put my earbuds in so I could hear it. I'm hoping that the other ones are a little bit higher. You did tell us before that particular video was going to be a little low.
Okay. Yeah, and I hope people could make it out. But, you know, even if you couldn't hear it, I think you still get the spirit of the story. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the words, too. So I used to come back from stories, and I would sit down at my keyboard, and it was almost as if I was staring at my fingers, as if, you know, the wonderful prose would somehow just come out of these fingertips, and it didn't work. And the reason I stared at my fingers is I didn't have the words. And I don't do that anymore, or at least not as often, because I come back knowing what the story is. And in many cases, and it was the case with this story, much of it was written in my notebook when I got back to the story. So we went to that Rotary meeting, and while the Rotarians were having their lunch, I wrote the opening line to the story. Spend all 6 years of your life in a slum in Nairobi, Kenya, and even a TV station's microphone is as good as Legos, as a toy. And then I wrote the closing line. Eventually, we had to take back that microphone, but the eyes, Moses gets to keep. Yay! And then there's connective tissue through the story that also fits the focus of the story. But now he's got something even better to show off, right? Those beautiful straight eyes. And the thing about focus is you can't just put a toe in. You need to immerse yourself in the focus of the story. So if you notice, when we came back at the end of the story, Moses wasn't just holding the microphone anymore. Did you see what else he had? Now he was wearing Jonathan's headphones as well. And at some point, Jonathan handed him his fanny pack, because we recognized that we can't just dip a toe in. If this is going to work, we have to be all in on this focus. So that helps us know what to put in the story, but it also helps us know what to leave out of the story. So what happens at meetings, at Rotary meetings? Well, there's a podium and a speaker. There were a couple of speeches. There was a presentation about the project that they had done with Moses, and we shot it, but you didn't see any of it. And why? Because it didn't fit the focus of the story. But there were some things that you did see from the meeting. You saw Moses doing that somersault. You saw him grab that woman's DSLR camera and pretending to take a picture of her, and she's being amused by that. So that went in the story. The other parts weren't in the story. The quotes may have been in the web script, but they weren't in the TV story, the quotes from the president of the Rotary. If Moses had gotten up out of his chair halfway through the meeting and had grabbed the microphone away from the speaker and tried to present his own speech, that would have been in the story, because that fit the focus of the story. So this is how it helps me put stories together under tight deadlines when I'm doing day turns, is to know not what the assignment is, but to know what the story is. And once we knew that this was a story about a curious little boy seeing the world through a whole new set of eyes, that then helped us tell the story.
Okay.
Let's Dorothy, any questions on that you had, or you think maybe people watching may wonder?
I think I may have a question that some people may have. So a story like that, then you must be allowed to go out and find the story as opposed to being handed.
Yeah, and I think I almost say let the story find me, and it's hard to do, especially under deadline pressure, to stand back and look for it. There's an old adage that some of you may have heard that even a blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while. And I think I spent years as a blind squirrel. Every once in a while, I would stumble on a story and Jupiter would align with Mars and I would come back with a good story. But if I practice this every day, and every day I tell myself I have to find the story, not the assignment, but I have to find the story. My odds of finding it become a lot better. And I think that that actually dovetails nicely into the next piece of video that we're going to look at. 2 years ago, I was sent down to Houston to help our sister station, KHOU, with their coverage of Hurricane Harvey. So we're all part of the Tegna family. And one thing that Tegna does really well is they bring resources in when one of its stations is facing a big story with a lot of needs. KHOU is on the air 24/7. They did a fabulous job, and they did it with the help of a lot of crews from outside of Houston coming in. People like me, Chad Nelson, the photographer from KARE, who went with me. So we're going to take a look at a little video clip that was shot, I believe, the second day that we were there. And I'm going to ask this question before we show the video. Is it possible to find the focus of a story, so the focus that's going to help you write that story, is it possible to find that in the first 60 seconds of video? So here's the backstory. I got a tip from the assistant news director at KHOU that they'd received an email at the station that a woman and her husband had given birth to twins during the hurricane. There was a link to a GoFundMe page. It was forwarded to me by the assistant news director, and he said, "Can you see if you can find these people?" So as all of you know, there's someone who sets up a GoFundMe page. So I was able to contact that person, who got me in touch, got me a phone number for the wife who'd just given birth. I called the wife. Their house had been flooded, so they were staying with relatives. And I said, called her up and I said, "Could we come over and talk to you?" And she said, "Well, could you come a little bit later, maybe this afternoon, because my husband just went to go, he's trying to get on a boat to go in and get the baby clothes out of the house." And so all of you being good reporters, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing that I was at the moment, which is I need to get to him and go with him to get the baby clothes out of the flooded house. So we were fortunate. He had to stop at Home Depot. Even though he had a head start, he had to stop to get some garbage bags. So we were able to catch up. And we actually got to the school parking lot, which was near the place where the boats were launching, a little bit before he did. So what you're going to see here is the first 60 seconds of video that we shot, the raw video that we shot. We put a microphone on Murray, and I'm going to show you what we saw in that first 60 seconds and see if you can find a focus for the story that we're going to tell in that first 60 seconds of video.
Didn't see yourself doing this a week ago, did you? No. Not, I mean, it's kind of like when we found out we were having twins. That was the absolute last thing I thought the doctor would tell us. So if somebody told me a week ago, when we found out we were having twins in the doctor's office, that was the absolute last thing I thought that the doctor was going to say to me is, "You're having twins," and it's kind of the same experience. The last thing I thought I'd be doing today. I mean, I expected to be at work, get off, have the next 2 weeks off to be with my new babies and my other two sons, and having a barbecue, watch some football. Yeah, curveballs. So. Doing well. Trying to get to my house to get a few things. I live on.
Now, I'm in a strange city. I've never covered news in Houston before, and I'm trying to navigate a hurricane. I don't cover a lot of those, the aftermath of a hurricane. But I feel really good right now as a reporter because I know what my story is about now. And I'm wondering,
let me stop you.
No,
let me stop you because somebody wants to let you know, so they're going to guess what you're going to say.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Right.
Okay. I was hoping we could do this two-way. I didn't know we could.
Okay. So, yes, this person, I think Sharif King, is saying the story is about the finding out last minute that he's having twins.
Yeah. Yes. No, you're right. And let me ask this. Did you hear a word or words that are going to help you? Because I heard a word that Murray said that is going to be a, and she's right, or he,
Okay.
whoever said. But
Jo-
did anyone hear a
Jo-
word?
Jonay Lewis says curveballs. And
Yeah.
everybody said curveball, curveball. That's what our members
That's
are.
the word I heard too.
Yes.
So I didn't know Murray. I don't know this city. I'm all kinds of nervous about reporting this story and trying not to disappoint KHOU and the other stations in the Tegna group who are going to run this story tonight. And I feel dynamite 60 seconds into this shoot because I think I know how to tell the story now. It may change, and I think we always need to remember that focus is organic. Circumstances can change. Something else better may come along, but I always feel better when I have a focus that I can start on until something better comes along. And nothing better came along on this day. So let's take a look at what we can do with that germ of an idea about curveballs that will help us efficiently tell this story for the evening news that night.
Just when you think you know where life is taking you.
Yeah, curveballs.
One curveball after another,
The other side of the street is my subdivision.
headed for Murray Poloski.
Maybe I got lucky and there's no water in my house.
Yeah, there's water in his house.
It feels like I'm in a movie. It just does not feel real. How is this possible?
Curveballs. All right.
This is Carter Ryan, and this is Cameron James. They were born on their daddy's birthday, which was Friday.
Friday. Just as Harvey was about to change their world.
We'll be home in 48 hours. No big deal.
Oh, man. The former Marine and his wife saved for years for this house.
Oh my God, look at that. Look at the pigs. 4 trying to escape.
Escape. Like their 2 older boys, 7-year-old Dylan and 4-year-old Drake, had to escape the flood while staying at their grandparents' house
Sorry.
as Nicole's babies were born.
The most gut-wrenching moment as a mother. Seeing a picture of your children getting on a boat and you're not there.
And that nursery back home.
The little onesie.
I got them.
Oh, it makes me want to cry.
It's just stuff, Cole. It's just stuff.
As a mom, you want to give them the best entry into the world. And I think I just feel like I wasn't able to do that.
Baby clothes in a garbage sack in a neighborhood unlikely to be home again for a year.
It's tough, you know, knowing how much she is hurting.
Yeah, curveballs.
But they're going to have a birth story, that's for sure.
Carter and Cameron and Harvey.
I have those 2 little babies is what's really going to help us get through.
Boyd Huppert, KARE-11 News, Katy, Texas.
That was great.
So it's not overstating it that I was scared, right? I'm trying to find my sea legs in a strange city, covering a story like this, and now I felt great because now I know how to tell the story. We shot 2 hours of video, and we ended up with, I believe it was 7, at the most 8 clips. So as you all know, you get a clip every time you start and stop the camera. So 2 hours of video, and Chad Nelson, who shot this, only stopped the camera 7 or 8 times. And you may say to yourself, well, that's a lot of video to go through. But it's not overwhelming if you know what you're looking for, because I didn't have to log all that video. In the same way, I didn't have to log that entire meeting with and the speakers in the Moses story. I didn't have to log all the video. So he was in the house probably almost an hour, and he looked for a lot of things, right? He looked for, his wife's a still photographer, and she had some wedding photos on hard drives that he needed to find. But that doesn't fit the focus, so that went out. Her wedding ring was in the house. Didn't fit the focus, so I didn't look through that part. But the parts that I looked for were the parts that fit the focus. So when he said, I'm hoping there's not water in my house, and the other gentleman who was helping people on the boats who said, "Oh, there's water in his house." That's a curveball. So that goes in the bucket, the save bucket. When he walks into the house and there are hogs, wild boar in the backyard, and he's startled by that, that's a curveball. So that goes in the save bucket. Certainly when he was walking around the house, Chad was actually downstairs getting some shots of the water on the floor and some of the dirt that had washed in and the hogs in the backyard. And he heard on his headphones, because he was still listening, he heard Murray start having a conversation with his wife on FaceTime, and heard her starting to get a little emotional, and then ran up the stairs. And as she sees those baby clothes, it just really hit her hard. That's a curveball. Murray didn't see that coming, and we as viewers didn't see that coming either. So that goes in the story. And then when we're done, I look at that bucket of things that fit the focus, and I discard the things that don't, and then I can very efficiently write the story. And my opening line is easy because I go back to my focus. One curveball after another for Murray Pawlowski. And then I need to wrap up my story as I'm writing. Curveballs. Connor and, I've forgotten the second twin's name, and Harvey. But I keep revisiting that idea of curveballs, and it makes it very easy and efficient to write the story. And if we haven't identified that at the beginning of the story, Connor and Cameron, I just remembered the other name. But if we don't identify a focus, and we just have an assignment, a mother's given birth to twins during Hurricane Harvey, then I have a really hard time telling that story. I come back and I don't know what to write when I get back to the station. And this way, I've been writing all day. I've been writing in my notebook all through the shoot as I see things, and I can structure them in a way that fits the focus of the story. Dorothy, any questions about that?
I just want to encourage our members to ask questions, and just reiterate that makes it a lot easier to do the story and makes your day a lot easier.
Let me show you another example too, and then we'll take some questions if there's some after this. I find that focus helps me the most on days when I really run up against something that I didn't expect. Like the story that has you tempted to call back to the assignment manager and tell her that him or her that it's not working out are the days that I need to lean most heavily on focus. And by the way, I define focus. This helps me if I think of focus as a character, an emotion, or a concept that ties the disconnected pieces of the story together. Character, emotion, or concept. So if we look at the first story we saw on Moses, what's the driver of that story? Character, emotion, or concept? Well, certainly a strong character. I mean, Moses is a very strong character. But there are also elements of emotion in that this curiosity that he has. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the collective emotion of a community. You're not focusing on one person, but maybe a community's resolve after a tornado or a hurricane or something. But what's this notion of concept? Well, concept is the thing that we invent as the storyteller to help us tie the disconnected pieces of the story together. So keep that in mind as we take a look at this little raw video clip. And before we do, let me just give you just a little bit of backstory. I was sent out it was in the days after Sandy Hook, sent with Jonathan Millott, one of our photographers here, too late to a gun debate hearing at the state capitol. Our political reporter was already there, but it was much bigger than anyone had anticipated. The hearing room filled up and spilled into a adjacent room. And our assignment manager and our producers decided they wanted a second lead story. So our political reporter was going to do the 6 o'clock lead, and I was assigned to do the 5 o'clock lead. We rushed over to the state capitol. And when we walked into the door, now we can roll the video, Jovan. This is what we saw. So there's our state capitol, and oh no, it's over. People in that hearing room were now standing out in the hall. The hearing room was empty. We'd arrived there at lunchtime. The hearing was wrapped up. It was done for the day. And now we have a decision to make. We really have two options. One of them is to call the assignment manager and tell her what an idiot she was for not sending us sooner. And she'll say to us, well, guys, I'm sorry, take the rest of the day off. No, that's not what she's going to say to us. No, she's going to tell us, I have another story in my bin of stories, and I'm going to send you on that one. But I don't like that option because they want me to be the lead at 5. It's noon now, and that sounds like a lot of work. So let's go with Plan B. How can we tell this story by using what we know about focus and concept, that thing that we're going to invent to hold the disconnected pieces of the story together? How are we going to tell this story? What do we have? We have a hall full of people, and that's all we have left of that hearing is a hall full of people. So given that we have a hall full of people, what if we try to put together the story like this? Yvonne, you can go ahead and roll it.
Providing guns to teachers? There's no way.
There were 2 debates at the Capitol today.
The law's already on the books.
The debate inside the hearing rooms and the one in the hall.
I, from a law enforcement perspective, disagree with you.
The man in the Minneapolis police wouldn't give us his name. Too political, he said, for a cop.
There was a security guard in Colorado.
He's debating with Donna Ness, a retired middle school teacher from St. Louis
Giving
Park.
us more guns is not going to solve this issue.
But if somebody came into your school and, God forbid, started shooting kids in the classroom, what is the first thing that you would do? You would call somebody to get there with a gun and put a stop to it.
It's a pretty divided issue.
So divided, it brought people together.
You don't want background checks, basically.
No,
You want mentally ill to easily have access to firearms.
That's Bill Krause, a self-employed carpenter from Plymouth, and a gun owner.
Common sense says that we should have restrictions on a tool that is designed to
I
kill.
don't think there's a compromise.
Crop farmer Dan Peterson and iron miner Dennis Goffey met for the first time today, too. No debate between them.
I just do not want to lose the right to own my weapon.
The gun lobby that ties the legs and the hands of law enforcement.
I happen to be law enforcement, and I'm a member of the NRA.
In the halls of power, the Second Amendment brought out an exercise of the first.
Plain and simple.
So this is an exercise in turning something that is a problem into a solution. So all we have is a hall full of people. So let's own that. Let's make it the best thing that happened to us today. And I do that by in the same way that Sports Illustrated photographer used those 2 words, Yogi's back, to take control of that failure. And I did it when I wrote, there were 2 debates in the Capitol today, the one in the hearing room and the one in the hall.
You know what I found interesting is that you did not interview anyone. You just let the sound in the exchange be the story.
And I give Jonathan Millot a lot of credit too. He walked in, he took that microphone off the top of his camera, the same one that Moses had been playing with, and he just walked into a conversation that people were having. And they were so engaged in that conversation, and including that police officer who wouldn't give us his name, but he wasn't giving an inch of that argument. He wanted to continue with that argument, even though there's a big camera there and he knows he's being recorded. And then the carpenter came over too, because I think he saw the camera there too, and he wanted to get his 2 cents in as well. So, and then when we finished, when that argument died down and the people went their separate ways, we looked around and the only people we had left were the crop farmer and the iron miner. And then we went and we did put microphones on them, and then asked them some questions about, wow, you've just been watching this. People just can't seem to come to any compromise. And then we got their input on that as well. So they become kind of the analysts who were watching this all play out. And then when we were done with that interview, there was nothing left to shoot. So we got in the car and we drove 2 blocks to a McDonald's down the street from the state capitol, and we had the best afternoon of our lives because it was 12:30 and our story didn't air until 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we had lunch. I think we had lunch twice. That's the kind of day we had. We had all afternoon to put the story together. And, in a half hour earlier, it was a frustration. But but by using focus and concept, we could take ownership of it. And my favorite part of the story is we went back to the lawn of the state capitol to do the live shot and then pitch to the story. The story aired, and I got a text from my news director at the time, Jane Helmke, and she said, I love the gun debate story. Great idea, taking it out of the meeting.
As if you planned that.
And she had no idea. And she was right, though. It was a better story. One, we were already covering the meeting in the 6 o'clock story, or the hearing. But many of the same arguments that were expressed at the podium in the hearing were being expressed in the hall, but in a different, and in some ways probably a more passionate way, but certainly in a way that our viewers hadn't experienced it before.
Let me interrupt you for a moment.
Yeah, please.
Since you're talking about focus, we have a question from Sue Giles. Do you have an example where the focus has been kind of hard to find?
Well, yeah, you know what? That's a fair question. And some days I try to find it every day. So I was the blind squirrel, found an acorn every once in a while. And then I started thinking about this. And now I find it most days. But there are days when I don't find it. And those aren't very good stories. And I don't put them in the lineup for my webinar because they're not great stories. And I know that, but the key is I know the reason why. And I drive home thinking about, okay, I need to work harder at this tomorrow. And, you know, Frank, we'd all, you know, if we're baseball players, we'd rather be 400 hitters than 200 hitters. And so that, to me, is what this is all about. This is about doing a better job on a more consistent basis, telling good stories for our viewers, and having our managers take notice every once in a while and send us a note so that we get renewed and get a nice raise at contract time. And having the satisfaction of driving home at the end of the day saying, I found it. Somewhere in all of that chaff, I found the few grains of wheat that allowed me to tell a good story today.
Let's use this a moment to ask a couple of other questions.
Sure.
We have members who were kind enough to send questions in early. So this one is from Kay Angram. Let's see, Boyd, where do you find your stories, and what routines or activities do you recommend reporters do to find these unique, compelling stories?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There are two answers here. The first one is it's good to put roots down at some point in your career, and we're all focusing on, when we're in small markets, getting to larger markets. But there's something to be said, and Dorothy, I'm sure you can speak to this too. At some point, putting roots down in a community, and once you do that, and people get to know you, you start getting story ideas sent to you. And those of you who are newer in the business, this is something you can look forward to when you do get that opportunity. So most of my stories now come to me by email. I get probably a half dozen story tips every day, and for my segment, my Sunday night segment. And so these days, I'm lucky because I have generous viewers who send me story ideas. Back in the day, like a lot of other people, I relied on good observation. So one of the reasons I still like doing daily news, I do daily news 2 days a week, and then I work on my segment, my long form feature segment, 3 days a week. But part of the reason I love daily news is in doing daily news, I stumble on things that I can use in my longer form story. Yeah. Or conversely, I get story ideas that are sent to me for my long form pieces that are better suited for a day turn.
I mean, you make.
But I think you know, there's a website in Minnesota of the Minnesota Newspaper Association puts it up, and I'm guessing there's probably one in everyone's state where there are links to every small town paper in your state, and I would watch that religiously. That we all have social media now, and that's a wealth of story tips. Just making sure to check Facebook feeds regularly and Twitter feeds. And when I am on daily news, that's a go-to for me too. I'm looking through my Twitter feed in the morning before I go to the story meeting.
Yeah, I will share with our members. I got fired from my first job for not being engaged in the community. When I look back on it, I was working in Peoria. I'm from Chicago. Every weekend or every day that I had off, I went home. And so I didn't join a church. I never went to the grocery store. I never did any of that stuff, except for in Chicago. That was a huge mistake. So I learned that mistake afterwards to make sure that you are engaged in your community, that you talk to the people when you get your hair done,
Yeah.
you know, that you go and you go to the different events that are in the city so that people can see you, get to know you, and know that you are embracing the community that you're living in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's even the people we know, our friends and family members who work this diverse array of occupations. And it's just asking them the question. My brother's a farmer. So when we get together, I ask him what's going on in the farm economy right now and what are the issues that are affecting farmers. I have a friend at my church who works in shipping. So he fills shipping containers that he doesn't physically fill them, but works the phones all day, moving product from the U.S. to China and back. And I always ask him, "What are you shipping now?" Now he tells me about the trade war and how that's impacting shipping. But I've done stories based on things that he's told me, and he's way ahead of the trends. People aren't figuring out the things that he knows until months from now. So I think if we think about the people that we know, and it's just thinking to ask those questions. But you mentioned the hairdresser. There may be issues that licensing of establishments like hers, or a myriad of other things that she may be involved with in her life. I think that's a great example, George.
Let's take another look. Let's take a look at another example.
So what are we looking at here? You probably can see there's been a fire. And you could pause there, Jovan. And actually, Jovan, can you back up do you have the ability to move the cursor back? Let's take a look at this. Yeah, there you go. So this is a convenience store in Minneapolis. Some video from last fall. Does not look to be a major story, but it was a slow news day in our newsroom. And at the afternoon meeting, I was asked just to go check it out. It occurred near a school, and one of our web people had mentioned that I don't remember. I think her daughter had said that it was a place that kids would hang out after school. So we went over to the convenience store, and wasn't sure we had a story. It's one of those, if we spend a half hour and we don't really find anything, then we'll probably call the assignment desk and they'll send us to something else. I didn't have the owner's name or phone number. Was hoping that he would be there. He wasn't. The fire had happened the day before. We talked to a neighbor, did a little interview with a neighbor at a pizza restaurant, the owner there. He knew the owner's first name was Martin, but didn't really know much else. I got a report from the fire department. And it was they determined it was an arson, that it was a fire that had started outside the store and spread into the store. So now we can roll the next little piece of video, Jovan. Chad Nelson, the photographer, went across the street to get some wide shots of the scene, and then he saw this.
Oh.
Did you hear that? He said hoop, because Chad saw these kids starting to arrive as school got out. And if you look next to the white truck over there, there's someone in a red coat. That's me in the red coat, and I'm talking to the intern, Jess.
Boy, our story's unfolding right before your eyes.
He said, Boyd, our story's unfolding right before your eyes, because he saw what I hadn't seen because I wasn't paying attention as these kids show up.
I was just amazed. Like, I didn't know this was going to happen.
I used to go in this store every day. Every day I was in this store.
Ooh.
Man, this store is the best store. I came in here every day, no matter if it was right when it opened or when it closed. The owner is really nice too. He would even, hit kids up with the IOU even every day.
Seriously, so you didn't have enough money, you covered it?
Yep, he would cover. We would pay what we could. If we didn't have enough, he would say, go ahead, pay the rest whenever you can.
Wow.
You guys have some more questions about him and what a great guy is? You have a couple of minutes.
So go ahead and pause it again, Siobhan. So this story just went from being a story about an arson fire to something much better, didn't it? And I give Chad a lot of credit. You just saw his raw video. He didn't wait for me, right? When he saw those kids crossing the street and I wasn't paying attention, he didn't wait for me to get there. He went in, he pulled that microphone off the top of his camera, and he got that first boy arriving, and that boy was incredulous that somebody had done this to his friend, the owner of this convenience store. And he was almost breathless as he tells how this owner had, if they were short money, he would float them the money. And then we went on to find out that sometimes he wouldn't even charge them if they didn't have enough money, if it was a small amount. And then we learned from there that a GoFundMe page had been started. And so I looked that up, and it was already over, I believe at that time it was already over $7,000. And a lot of money that was contributed by people in the neighborhood, by kids, by their parents. And so let's roll the next little clip of video, and we started asking kids about that GoFundMe.
We want him to do what he like doing, which is operating, running the store. Just know that we with him.
You know, sound bites are the glue that kind of holds stories together. It's our quotes. But I find that often the most compelling part of a soundbite isn't the soundbite, isn't what the people are saying. It's what's happening in their faces, and often what happens in their faces as after they're done speaking. And that's I think is a great example of that. That high school student who said, "We just want him to know that we're with him." And that smile to me says so much. So that's probably going to show up in the story, right? Now the owner is ultimately going to show up. We interviewed the boy who started the GoFundMe page. He had Martin's last name and he had Martin's phone number. And so Martin is going to walk over from his home a couple of blocks away to meet with us. So the next video clip you're going to see is us in the store with Martin.
Or when the store's open, you're here.
Yeah, I'm here. Once the store is open, I'm here from morning till night. I open and close.
Yeah. 7 days a week?
7 days a week.
Never a day off.
Never a day off, except on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Yeah. Yeah.
So go ahead and pause it there again. It's hard as a reporter because it's not the way we're trained. You know, we're trained to jump in at news conferences and ask the next question. We're not trained to not ask questions, but sometimes that can be a really powerful storytelling tool, just to see what happens if there's silence. And when he told that story to us about never having a day off, 7 days a week, every day of the year except Thanksgiving and Christmas, it just struck me that that's something that's probably going into the story. So let's see what happens if I don't jump on the end of that and just let the silence linger. You may see that result in the story as well. And it happened again in the next question, actually. And here's that little piece of video.
I'm racking my brains to think of somebody who would do something like this. I just can't. I don't get it.
You're saying the best and some of the worst and the best of people in this area.
Just unbelievable. You know? Yeah. And I just don't know why somebody would. You know. I just don't know.
There's a lot to ponder there, isn't there? Isn't there? And so we're letting Martin actually ponder that, and we'll look at the story in just a second, and you'll see how we're able to use that. But just one technical point too, we see a lot of TV news cameras have the lights on top, and it kind of leaves you with that look of someone working in a coal mine. And you saw in that raw video right at the end there that I was off to the side holding a light to the side, so we have nice shadows across Martin's face. And
investigators
and I think that's important for a couple of reasons. It's hard when we're on the person on the other side of that camera when we're shining that bright light in their faces, and by me just holding that off to the side, then he doesn't have that bright light in his face. And it's also not it's not very flattering to do that to people who we're putting in our stories, to shine that bright light right in their faces, and I think we do a disservice. So that's just something that we try to do when we're shooting at night or we're in a building. We take the light off. That happens to be a light that we'd use on a live shot, and I can turn it down and just hold it off to the side for the nice shadows. So, Joanne, why don't we play the story? So you've seen some of the pieces of this story. Now let's put it together and see how we could turn an assignment about an arson fire into a story about some kids who are helping restore Martin's faith in his own neighborhood.
Investigators say a weekend fire that destroyed an immigrant's beloved South Minneapolis business was arson. But out of something so bad came something equally as good. Here's KARE 11's Boyd Huppert.
For those just passing by, it's no more than a burned out convenience store.
Every day I was in this store.
For Devin James and his Washburn High School classmates,
Everyone wants to be there.
it's much,
That's our favorite place ever.
much more.
I was hoping Martin was okay.
Still greeting the Washburn kids. That's him, Martin Owens. And this is what's left of his CK store.
Yeah.
His store and theirs.
He would ask how your day is going instead of you asking how his day is going. Yeah.
If we didn't have enough, he would say, go ahead, pay the rest whenever you can.
Opening to closing, he was always there.
7 days a week.
Never a day off.
Every day off, except on Thanksgiving and Christmas.
An immigrant who worked in other people's stores till he'd saved enough to buy his own.
Yeah.
Now destroyed, investigators say, by a fire someone set.
I just don't know why somebody would, I just don't know.
Martin is beginning to know this.
Just know that we with him.
More than $9,000 raised in 2 days on a GoFundMe page.
Yeah.
Started by Patrick Lockwood, a Washburn senior.
That's all we're looking to do is help him out and get him back on his feet.
It really warms my heart. I still can't believe it.
Even through this, Martin is learning he still has love in store.
Yeah.
Boyd Huppert, KARE 11 News, Minneapolis.
Wow.
Farms Insurance Company recently canceled his policy.
We have 7 minutes left. I'm going to let you wrap this one up and then try and get as many questions in.
Yeah, I was just going to, I hope people saw some of those moments of silence and how we were able to give those context. So we held the shot with the girl who smiled and explained that they'd raised all this money in just a couple of days before that smile. And then when Martin was just pondering after telling us about his long hours and working every day in the store, I gave that some context. An immigrant who worked in other people's stores before he saved enough money to buy his own. That gives context to the weight of the world that's now on this person's shoulders. And now he's beginning to understand how much he means to the kids in the neighborhood. And so we started out with a story about an arson. I have, it's on my laptop right in front of me. I have the arson report that I got from the fire department before I wrote this story. But I didn't, all I need to know is that firefighters, the investigators thought that the fire was intentionally set. That's all I need to know from that report. I don't need to pull out, take a picture of the report or pull out any other information from it, because that's not what the story is about. Yes, it happened to be a fire at his store, and they believed it was caused by an arson. It was intentionally set. But that's not the story. The story is about the community and the students coming together to help their friend.
All right, let's go for a couple of questions before we have to wrap up. Other than remixing the best soundbite, how do you write such compelling opening and ending lines?
I need to know the focus. So I think in each of these stories, if you think about every story that I showed, I could write the opening line because I knew what the story was about. And in most cases, it's written in my notebook before I get back to the station. And if I can come back to the station with the opening line and the closing line written, it's so easy to put the rest of it together. So in the case of the Martin story, I kind of wrote what I was experiencing. For most people passing by, it's no more than a burned out convenience store, which is how I looked at it when we first walked up. That's what I saw too. It's just a burned out store, and it's not that big of a fire. So I didn't see the story. So I just spoke what I was experiencing. And then the closing line in that story, I recognized this was an act of love that was taking place. So I just played with that a little bit and came up with that closing line. Martin now knows he still has love in store.
All right, here's another one. How does the focus assist in writing package intros and tags?
At our shop, the producers write the lead-ins for most of the stories. On my Sunday night segment, I write my own. I'd look at the lead-in as walking the viewers up to the launch pad. So I try to set the table for the story that they're about to watch. Is the way I think about writing a lead-in. And in the tag, I try to save a little bit of information that didn't fit in the tag, or something that was non-visual, that didn't necessarily fit the focus. So in the Martin story, and I know the tag got clipped, but the anchor goes on to say that the contents of the store were uninsured, and that the reason for that is that Martin's insurance company had canceled his policy because he'd had after a number of break-ins. So he had no insurance. So if he was going to rebuild, it was going to cost him a fair amount of money. And I could have put that in the package, but that takes us away from the focus of the story. So I saved that for the tag. And the good news here is, by the next day, the GoFundMe had reached its goal of it's over $20,000.
Oh, is that great? We are just about to run out of time, so
Yeah.
I've got this one last question because I think it would be helpful for all of us.
Yeah.
Do you have any book recommendations or fellow journalists whose storytelling you admire?
Whose I'm sorry, I heard storytellers I admire.
Any book recommendations or fellow journalists whose storytelling you admire?
Oh, sure. Books. L. Tompkins has a wonderful book called Aim for the Heart that I really like. Deborah Potter, another person I like a lot, has a book that's used as a textbook often. And I'm trying to remember the name of it, but if you look up Deborah Potter, she's with the organization News Lab. Her book is also very good. And journalists I admire, Chris Vanderveen in Denver at the Tegna station in Denver, KUSA, is a marvelous investigative reporter whose work I really like. Our investigative reporters here too, Lauren Lemanchek and AJ Legault, also do great work. My mentors, as I was coming up, I didn't meet him, but I studied his work. Charles Perrault. Those of you who are younger, Dorothy, you'll remember Charles Perrault. Our younger friends might serve themselves well just to look up on YouTube a Charles Perrault story or two. My favorite involves a Thanksgiving when a sharecropper and his wife welcome home their, I believe, 9 children who all come home for Thanksgiving with advanced degrees. They're doctors and lawyers and heads of companies, and they all grew up in this little cabin. And it's a beautiful story that Charles Perrault told in the late 60s or early 70s that still brings tears to my eyes when I watch it. And another person I learned from was John Larson, who some of you may know as well. John worked in Seattle, then went to Dateline NBC, and now does work for PBS. But I appreciate that question, because I think it's important to have mentors, and mentors who will look at your work and help you, but also mentors who you just learn by watching their stories and trying to figure out what it is they're doing. When I would watch those Charles Perrault stories, it would frustrate me on one hand because he was so good and I didn't know how to get there, but I was just trying so hard to figure it out. And ultimately I'll never have as big a storytelling toolbox as Charles Perrault did, but every day I can come to work and try to add to it.
All right, I want to thank you, and I want to say to our members that you're like me, you're thinking that we want to hear something like this again. So I love doing these webinars. Please give me your ideas. If you have some ideas, you can do your own webinar, because this is for us. We need this kind of content. We need to see more of this kind of content. Boyd, this has been fabulous.
Dorothy, thank you for putting this together. You were persistent, and we tried this once before and had a fail, and you were persistent and came back and scheduled this again. And I want to thank Jovan too, for Jovan took care of the technical side of this, and she was fabulous, did a flawless job.
Thank you, guys. Goodbye, members. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
See you later.